Welcome back to the Neighbors Podcast. Today we have Pastor Ryan Britt with us. He is the executive pastor at the Church of 1122 and truly one of the smartest, wisest men that I know, whether it's leadership or pastoring. He is a well of information, and we really cover the gamut today, my friends. So get your notebooks out and ready. If you're driving the car, I don't know, pull over or take out your notebook, but be safe. But truly, you are going to want to capture these nuggets. We talk everything from why the life of a Christian should be one in obscurity, which that is very hard for me. The spirit of acedia, do you even know what that is? I didn't. It is the spirit of slothfulness in the Christian walk, and how this distraction from purpose is plaguing our culture. We talk about leadership, the difference between leadership and influence. We talk about self-care versus self-love for God's sake. I mean, truly, this episode, it's going to be one of those that changes some things in your life. So I can't wait for you to hear it. It was a joy to have him on. He means a lot to the Neighbors Podcast, and I was just so excited to be able to pick his brain in such a variety of topics. So here is my conversation with Pastor Britt. Okay, Pastor Britt, welcome to the Neighbors Podcast.
Glad to be here.
I'm so glad that you're here. And I couldn't decide what to talk to you about today because you're kind of this well of leadership, knowledge, and wisdom. And so we are going to cover a lot today. We're going to go like rapid fire through the most variety of topics we've probably ever covered on this podcast. But I feel like you're here for it. You here for it?
I'm in. Let's
okay.
go.
First, we have to start with what your hot take is, which you didn't know what a hot take was yesterday. And Anna Catherine, your daughter, had to help you with what a hot take was. So what is a hot take, like an unpopular opinion that you think should be globally accepted?
Well, based on me not knowing what a hot take is, a universal fact is I'm not cool at all. So that's one. But in response to your question, two is, of all the music that's ever been made, 90s rap music is the best. It's not even, you can't debate it.
Wow, okay. Okay. Yeah, I would say that's definitely a hot take.
I'm just telling you, it is. It's the best. Think about it. Tupac, Dre, Snoop,
I mean,
Coolio.
Which Snoop is really
Somehow
making his
Snoop
comeback.
went from Ain't Nothing But a G Thing Baby to being an ambassador for the United States of America.
America's sweetheart.
Explain that.
No, he was the most compelling part of the Olympics. I mean, of course, the athletes were too, but Snoop, like, he captured the hearts of America.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he got paid for that too.
Yeah, he got probably generously paid for it.
So
And he was probably on drugs the whole time. But
yeah. 90s rap, check it out. Master P and the No Limit Soldiers, 3-6 Mafia, Skilo, Kilo
3-6
Wally.
Mafia
Come
is
on,
great.
guys.
Get with the program. If you're not, is that like what you listen to? Is that your music of choice? Like if you're driving in the car?
Not anymore.
Okay.
But
But every once in a
objective feedback on music's history.
Fair.
That's my hot take. No,
Okay.
Mostly now it's, I've been in a bit of a singer-songwriter, Tyler Childers kind of vibe lately.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you bestowed 90s rap onto your children?
No.
Not yet.
No, yeah, they don't know enough of what most of the words mean.
Right. You're not ready to have
I'm
those
trying to raise them
conversations.
in godliness.
Oh, right. Okay.
And so when they're much older, we may have a jaunt.
Okay. All right. So you are the executive pastor of our church, and you travel around speaking to many churches about kind of, would you say like the behind the scenes of how to run a church, or like how would you describe what it is that you do?
Well, it's shrouded in mystery. So I don't even know exactly what my job is other than to help Pastor Joby do all the things that God's called him to do and therefore called our church to do. I spend a lot of time with other church leaders, talking about leadership, church leadership specifically. That could mean governance. That could mean culture. That could mean things as tactile as workflows. I spend a lot of time talking about culture, whether that's a leadership culture, staff culture, congregational culture. One of the unique things God's done at 1122 is really grown a healthy culture of generosity. Both in time and talent and treasure. And so a lot of churches want to glean from how do you grow that, how do you disciple people well in those areas over time. And so I spend a lot of time training churches and doing that, which is a real gift.
Yeah, I think a lot of people probably think church just happens, like they just show up on a weekend and they hear someone like Pastor Joby or whatever church they go to. But there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and a lot of steering and navigating of situations and relationships and people and how these all line up. And especially a church of our size and many other churches' sizes, it's very complicated. And so it takes a lot of thought and intentionality. Like when you talk about culture, which we'll talk about too, it just takes a lot of intentionality, which is really so that's what you're doing, which a lot of that, it would never be seen by someone who attends church, but it will be felt if it's off.
Yeah, that's the dream, is that no one knows when you're an executive pastor or whatever. At least for me, my aim is always that as few people know who I am as possible, but God allows for me to have great influence unknown. So
Yeah, which is, a lot of people do know you because you also preach quite a few times, which we just talked about, that how your doctor told you to start doing hot yoga for your back. And we just talked about, like, you probably, if you went to a yoga studio, like 100% you would run into an 1122er, and you're probably not trying to do yoga alongside.
yeah, you will not see me, nor would you want to see me at a yoga studio anytime soon.
Okay, so when did you know that leadership was going to be a part of your life? Like, was it always just kind of in you? Were you the kid in school that just naturally was leading the class?
It was that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember coming home, I want to say middle school, maybe early high school. I was playing baseball and on one of the teams that I was on, and every time something would go wrong on the team, my coaches would yell at me first. And they pull me up to the front of the bus when I'm traveling to games, and they would sit down and be like, all right, here's what we need from the team. And I just remember going home to my dad and saying, hey, I think this is busted, man. Why am I responsible for everybody else? And my dad just, in his way, he would just sit across the table and he listened to me and he just goes, son, nobody chooses leadership. Leadership chooses them. What are you going to do? And I was like, well, I don't even know what that means. So I'm mostly going to complain, And so, but that's just kind of been, God's just opened doors. I think my current season of leadership, I only have two things that I can point to. Honestly, one is that I'm my father's son, and two is that Pastor Joby Martin picked me. I mean, other than that, I have no legs to stand on as to how I got to be a part of the things that I get to be a part of.
So, I mean, you haven't walked the easiest road in life. You've faced a lot of loss and grief, and yet you stand in front of many groups of people, whether it's church-wide preaching on a weekend or in our weekly staff meetings or even smaller meetings, and you always maintain this confident faith in God, which maybe you don't always feel confident, but you always have this very convicted place of surrender. Yet you've walked a pretty hard path. So can you just share a little bit about how you've maintained that security and faith amidst a lot of loss that you faced?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's a lot of times it's day to day and week to week. I buried my mom. We buried my mom when I was 14. She had a nasty fight with cancer that we lost on this side, at least. And that was a very transformative event in my life. And then my dad got sick with a really rare brain disease called PSP, which is like a Parkinsonian's disease. And the way it manifested early was in a really nasty depression. He was like a force in the kingdom of God. And if you know me or my brother, it'd be similar to me or my brother, just waking one day, we just went off can't get out of bed, can't put sentences together. That's the way it felt with my dad. We didn't see it coming at all. And that led to like 10 years worth of fighting this disease that ended up taking his life. And so some of those things of both of my parents dying young, which I'm not certainly not the only one that's ever happened to, but unique road for sure. Failed a lot in ministry. My wife and I moved 8 times in 8 years, 4 different states. We were part of a church planting organization that was honestly just a disaster. And we were a disaster. My wife kind of held us together, honestly. And so I think honestly, like, I don't know, other than failing forward, by God's grace. It's the only thing that I can point to. And you don't realize that you're failing forward until you're able to look over your shoulder in hindsight. And I've had enough life now to where I can look over my shoulder all the time and only pretty much see God's faithfulness. And the redeeming quality of what felt like serious failures or serious hurt, that God met me in those places over and over and over and over again. And so I think that that's it, is that I've got enough that I look over my shoulder and go, God's been faithful. And I still can't explain everything. I still don't have all the answers, but I know that he's been faithful. And if I look far enough over my shoulder, both theologically and actually, I see an empty tomb. And at the end of the day, if the tomb is empty, as we say at our church all the time, then that is the most real thing of anything that's real. And if I really believe that, and then I live my life much in, like, I don't even feel like I have choices anymore. Like, I just am just surrendered to, this is the reality of my life. And so I don't feel like I'm in ministry and I have a family, and it's just my life. And part of my life I happen to get paid for, but it's all just one big thing that's rooted in God's faithfulness over time. And he gives and he takes away. And so I could easily be entitled, and at times I am. But I try to be in the posture of gratitude for God's faithfulness and for everything, because I know how quickly it can go. You know, the relationships, the family, church, friends. I mean, that stuff can change on a dime. And so I'm trying to enjoy it while I have it.
Yeah, failing forward. I mean, I think that hits a lot of people, because life is hard. We just said right before we started recording, like, life is just hard. And if you're not in hard right now, hard is coming, or you've just been through hard. And taking steps forward, no matter how small, is just the only way. You just have to walk through it and in the direction of Jesus, which is forward.
For sure.
All right. So, like I said, you teach our all staff meetings almost every week. I mean, now it's not every week, but so I've probably heard.
I'm making a comeback next year.
You are?
Oh yeah.
Wow. Okay.
This year my schedule got away from me a little bit.
Okay.
But it'll be way more Britt than you want next year.
Come on.
Just letting you know.
Okay, so I've been on staff for 7 years. So I've probably heard you teach. I mean, what do you think that is? Probably 150 times at least. Oh yeah,
at least.
No, because you used to teach almost every week.
Yeah. I would say. I mean, anyway. It's
okay. It's
at
a
least
lot. Hundreds of times.
Yeah.
I've heard you teach, and anytime you teach, I'm always rapidly taking notes. And so I honestly, in preparing for this, because I didn't know what I wanted to ask you, because there's just so many directions that we could go, I just went back through my notes from like 2017 and just compiled some of my favorite quotes that you've said in those meetings and those teachings. And then we're just going to talk about them. And you probably won't even remember a lot of these quotes, because I feel like a lot of times you say stuff and you don't even remember saying them. Like, I'll quote something back to you that you said and you don't remember it.
It happens all the time.
It's just how much wisdom you're saying all the time. Okay. Also, I should say, I know a lot of this.
Don't confuse wisdom and words. Just because I say many words, it doesn't mean.
Well, I chose the ones that were wise.
It. Yeah.
Which you're pulling this. I'm sure you have lots of original thoughts, but you consume more content than pretty much anyone I know. So this is from probably thousands of hours of books and content that you've consumed as well. So if you remember anything along the way from a book or anything, then you can mention that if people want to do a deeper dive. Okay, first we're going to talk about obscurity, which you even touched on it in explaining your role, that the best thing that would happen is no one knows your name, but it's your influence is felt even that they wouldn't put your name on it. So this life of obscurity, first, what does obscurity mean? And why is the life of a Christian meant to be lived in obscurity?
I think the most basic definition of obscurity is being unknown. And we know in the kingdom that there's no such thing, that we are known by God, we are loved by God. He knows for many the hairs that are on their head. For me, it would be like the hairs that are in my beard, you know? And so, but he knows. And so we're so known by God, we can live without the appetite to be known for things by others. I want to be known by others, but I don't want to be known for things. And necessarily, that's not my goal. If God does that, great. That said, I think the definition of obscurity is being unknown. I would say it's the pursuit of being unknown. And I think in the kingdom, there's someone greater that I want you to know, or that we want you to know. And obviously not in all my moments is that true. But I think the call on all of our lives of significance is that Jesus would be known, and that we would preach the gospel, love our families, die and be forgotten, and Christ be glorified. So,
well, this is hard for me, I will say, and I will confess right here, right now. And I use this illustration that you used originally. I've used it in several teachings, and I kind of stopped giving you credit, so sorry. But
after it's like 2 times, and after that you make it your own.
But you said when you were teaching on obscurity, you said we're to be a drop of water in a vat of wine, and Jesus is the wine. And if we're water, it's like we still have our chemical properties, H2O, but we smell like the wine, we look like the wine. You can't see the drop of water anymore, even though it maintains its uniqueness of who we're created to be. It's covered by Jesus. And then you added, a lot of us spend a lot of time trying to be a drop of oil in a vat of wine. Like we want to smell and look like Jesus. And this is my biggest bend. I want to look and feel like Jesus. I want to glorify him, and everything I want to do, I want to point to him, but I still kind of want to be me. And I still kind of want people to see I'm still in the vat of wine, in the Jesus. And it's just not what we're called to do. So how, especially on a public platform or something like this, where a name's on it, we're talking publicly, like, how do you still pursue a life of obscurity and have a platform? Is it possible?
Yeah, I think it is possible. I think many have done it. I think many have tried and gloriously failed. And so I think the answer to that question is motivation and means. And so, what is your actual motivation? And is that motivation the love of Christ, the name of Christ, the kingdom of Christ, as far as you can discern your own heart, and as far as you can keep yourself in check? No one's motivations always are only Christ. It's just not. We're hoping that that's true, and one day that will be true. But on a motivational level, why do I want my kids to succeed? On a motivational level, is it for my name? Is it for their name? Or is it for the glory of God? Why do I want to be faithful in ministry? Why do I want, if God puts a microphone in my hand or a camera in my face, what's my motivation in it? I actually fall probably, Pastor Joby wears me out on this. I usually fall on the ditch on the wrong side, to where I will just stay so far away from it, because I'm actually afraid of my own pride, and which is it's like a jacked up pride. It's like an inverted pride. Like, I'm so afraid to do it for my name's sake that I won't also walk in my anointing, which is it's a whole thing to like think through. Pastor Joby does it as well as anybody I've ever met. But so on a motivational level, do I have people in my life that are keeping my motivations in check that I'll listen to? Am I able to question my assumptions about myself and about what I'm actually doing this for and what do I want? And when I have those carnal moments of, whatever, let's just take this podcast, we have X number of thousands of listeners. God, I want 5 times that. Why? What's the point? And questioning those assumptions, and even when those motivations are faulty, bringing those things to the feet of Christ, and not trying to ignore them, but saying them out loud so that they lose their power, so that you can actually, 2 Corinthians 5, for the love of Christ compels me. And so motivations matter, and then means. What's the means by which you're trying to get there? Most people are focused on the what we're doing and even the why we're doing it, which is motivation. But how we do something matters as much as what we're doing. And so how can I look back and go, how am I actually surrendering this to Christ? So I stopped sending out, for example, I felt convicted years ago to not ever send out another resume. And I don't even know if this is all the way right, but if my phone rings, I generally assume God's on the other side of it. And there's a few people that I've just kind of put my life in their hands, that if a significant enough phone call comes, then Pastor Joby Martin is going to be a part of that decision-making. My wife, I have a really good friend, Joel, my brother. This is kind of like a small group of folks that, based on the size or the scope of the decision, I almost put the decision completely in their hands, because I just don't want to be in the place where the means by which I'm doing something is for me to get credit, or for me to advocate for myself, or for me to go, hey, you know what? I got an idea. Let's do more of me. And,
which is so hard in the world that we live in, which is, it's for me and mine. And we're all about advocating, self-advocation, and go after what you want and make a name for yourself and pursue significance. So this is quite against what we're fed every single day.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of no one's going to advocate for you, you got to do it for yourself, is fine in American culture. I'm just not first an American, and neither are you.
Yeah.
And if I believe the Holy Spirit of God is my advocate and Jesus is my intercessor, and I want to live like I actually believe that. I do believe that. I just want to live like I believe that. And I feel like I'm being real preachy, like I've got it all figured out. I don't. These are thoughts that I have, but the gap between what I think in my head and how I live with my life and believe and really love in my heart is vast gap.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think that I'm not going to, I try really hard not to advocate for me. But I'm also surrounded with great people that I love and they love me. And when everybody's for everybody, it's easy to not be, to advocate for yourself. But when you feel like you're the only one, that it's hard. So,
yeah, I actually remember, when I was praying through starting this podcast, and kind of what you said earlier about how you don't have ministry, you don't have family. We're all just kind of one thing. So when I was praying through starting the podcast, even though it's not a part of my full-time job as a minister and staff member of our church, it still is, because anything I do outside of that is still a reflection of the church because I'm on staff there. So it's all one. So we had this call where I had my one pager. I was presenting to you what my podcast was going to be. It wasn't even called Neighbors at the time. It was more just like the idea of where I was going. And I remember praying before that meeting. I was so nervous because, I mean, you're so nice. You're so kind. You are nice. I don't love the word nice, but you're kind, but you're kind of a hard word. I can't say, like, you're not afraid to say what needs to be said. And anyway, I was just like, he could easily tell me no. And my whole prayer was like, okay, God, if he tells me no, that's what I want to hear that from him. And I was so nervous because I just thought you were going to poke all these holes in it. And I just remember having that call and you read it and you just said, I mean, you had one really helpful piece of feedback and you just said, yeah, like, this is great. Like we bless this or whatever. And it was so freeing to not feel like I had to advocate for myself over the top. It was really just like, this is what I feel like God's laid on my heart. What do you think about it? If you shut this door, I will shut this door. I'm not putting all my chips in this basket. I'm not going to be devastated if you shut this door. And trusting someone that you trust to help make that decision is really freeing. And that has never been the case for me. I feel like I've always white knuckled things, projects, whatever it is, like, I'm going to make this happen. I don't need anybody else to tell me how it is. And this was the first thing that I was open-handed with. And it was so much more freeing in the process, because then I'm like, okay, I actually do think this is what God's calling me to do and not just what I'm trying to make myself do. Does that make sense?
It's a great example. I mean, yeah, totally. That's how I try to live my life, is submitted unto the authorities that God's put in my life and submitted to the wisdom and the friends around me.
Yeah.
And I've just found the lower I try to get, like the more humble I try to force myself to be, even when my mind and my mouth aren't connected. I try to really force myself. It just feels like the lower I get and the more I seek obscurity, the more joy and peace I live in. I don't know. So.
Yeah. All right, really taking a turn from obscurity into acedia, which a lot of people probably have never heard the word acedia.
Mm-hmm.
I actually hadn't heard it until you unpacked it. There's a book called, is it called Acedia?
Acedia, the book you're referring to is called Acedia and its Discontents, the Metaphysical Effects of Boredom in the Empire of Desire. So good luck with that.
Yeah, and after you taught on acedia, Wes and I bought the books and we were going to go through it together. I think we got like one chapter in. We were like, we have no idea what this book is talking about.
Yeah, it's tough. It's
All
a
right.
tough read.
So what is acedia and why? I've heard you say in several rooms, this is the thing that is trying to take out, that the enemy is trying to use to take us out right now as Christians. So what is it? How do we war against it?
There's a newer book that just came out recently by, I want to say her name's Nancy something or another. It's called Acedia and Me.
Okay.
And it's
easier read than
it's easier
the
than the other
metaphysical?
one. Yeah, J.R. Snell wrote the other one, and he is an incredibly intelligent human. And so the acedia, the Bible talks about it. It uses the word sloth, and Proverbs talks a ton about the spirit of the sloth, and the sluggard. And we don't talk about it much anymore. Acedia is a Latin word, and ultimately what it means is the rejection of purpose. And that we live so much of our life trying to reject our purpose. And the easiest example to understand for me has always been when I'm frustrated with my kids. What am I actually frustrated with? Am I frustrated with their behavior? Am I frustrated with, on what level am I frustrated? What am I frustrated with? Well, generally, what frustrates me in this life with my children or anybody else is that they aren't doing what I want them to do the way that I want them to do it. And, or maybe even more importantly, they are keeping me from doing whatever I want whenever I want. And that's what's frustrating about being a parent, is that most of the time my children are in the way of me doing whatever I want whenever I want, and I see them as a burden instead of embracing being their parent as a purpose for which I exist. And so we spend so much time rejecting purpose. You know, the amount of time people spend being busy, not working, is inordinate compared to the amount of time that would actually take to do work. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so there's something in us, and it's the spirit of the sloth, the acedia, that's eating away. I mean, we binge on Netflix, we binge on television, we binge on our phones, we binge on, and any of these things in doses are fine, but we binge on them. Why? It's because we're bored, and nothing truly captivating has captivated our imaginations. And so we just find ourselves running on this treadmill of borderline insanity, where we're trying to forge for ourselves an existence that is completely devoid of the purpose for which God created us and created the thing. And so it's a rejection of purpose. And
so how do you fight against it?
Yeah. The line is all carry the yoke well. And so marriage is a gift. It's not a burden. And there's great, glorious, heavenly purposes in marriage. That marriage is not about marriage. Marriage is about Jesus' relationship to his church. And carrying the yoke is, what are the burdensome things in marriage? Okay, so for me, I hate washing clothes. Hate it. I don't love washing dishes. I don't like picking up clutter. I don't necessarily like, fill in the blank. I can resist and reject those things as an inconvenience to my life, or I can see them as an opportunity to walk in purpose, the purpose of being married, which is to serve others as more significant than myself unto the glory of Christ. So when I do the dishes, can I connect the dishes to painting this picture that Christ be magnified on the earth. You understand what I'm saying? Like, I'm not trying to be too heady here, but these things are connected. And so in the boring, monotonous, undervalued tasks that we find so burdensome, I'm finding that those things are where the real purpose is found and real meaning is found. And so it is a very deep demonic spirit. If the spirit of fear is a real thing, so is the spirit of acedia. And it has captivated our entire country for decades. And we are lost in the rejection of purpose, and we need a lot of help.
It's probably really subtle too, because different from the spirit of fear that might be paralyzing or it feels so present. Like if you've ever felt under a spirit of fear, it's so paralyzing and you almost have this cloud over your eyes. But I feel like acedia is much more subtle because it's in the mundane. So everybody has task lists. And as you get older, there are only more tasks. If you have kids, if you own a house, like if the more you add to your life, the bigger your task list is going to grow. And it can be so easy to be lulled into the monotony of those tasks. And you have to be really intentional to pull yourself out of that, because no one, at least that I know, is having the opportunity to go every single day, all day, and just sit and marvel at the wonder of who God is, whether it's in creation or whatever it is. Everybody has things that they have to do. And so knowing that it exists, because even the way that you talked about it, of course, I read sloth in the Bible and I just think laziness. And I think, well, I'm not a lazy person, so that doesn't apply to me. But it's actually much deeper than laziness. It's actually this subtle getting caught up in the monotony and missing out on, being captivated, which I love that word that you used.
Yeah, the Proverbs talks about it and says the sluggard will say that there's a lion in the streets. There's a lion in the streets. While they have a hard time bringing their hand to their mouth. And what he's saying is that being a sluggard or being the spirit of sloth is not about being lazy. It's about being distracted. And there's a lion in the streets. Look over here, look over here, look over here, look over here. And when over here, like actually doing anything fruitful or meaningful, like feeding yourself, you're just so slow to do it. So you're crazy busy, you're obsessed with hurry, but it's all distraction. And just because your brain is tired because you're staring at screens all the time doesn't actually mean you're doing anything meaningful. And the spirit of the sluggard loves it.
Yeah.
And so it's, what are we giving ourselves to? And it's the things that you said, the things I have to do. A lot of those things are get to do's.
For sure.
But we see them as have to do's because we've rejected the purpose of those things.
For sure.
So
for sure. All right. So we live in a culture not only of the spirit of acedia, but we got the spirit of self-care happening. This is an epidemic of you have to care for yourself. And you said this quote one time, that we turn self-care upside down with the idea that self-love is for God's sake. And then you gave 4 levels of self-love: loving self for self's sake, loving God for self's sake, loving God for God's sake, loving self for God's sake. So maybe people got a little bit lost in there, but can you talk about turning self-care upside down with the idea that self-love is for God's sake?
Well, this is quite the question, but the Bernard of Clairvaux wrote a pamphlet many years ago called "For the Love of God."
We don't have any pamphlets anymore.
And that's true. You can buy this on Amazon, and it's not as hard to read as a CD and its discontents, but it is hard. And he talks about the 4 layers of love, and a great way to think about it is not like climbing a ladder, layers, or going up a staircase. Like I figure out this level of love and then I move to the second one, and then I move to, the way to think about it is much more like a fire burning. And that fire is never disconnected from itself. And so, but there's hotter and hotter parts of the fire the deeper and deeper you get into it. And that is very much how love works. And at the end of the day, God created us as creatures of affection. And what he's after is our hearts and our love. And to give him our love is the very purpose for which we exist. Now, love plays out on a lot of levels. The first is love of self. If I mess these up, correct me, but love of self for the sake of self. And they put that in a Christian context. It's like many people come to faith in Jesus Christ because they don't want to go to hell. It's for the sake of themselves, right? And I don't know that that's necessarily illegitimate or wrong. I think it's a real thing. I think a lot of people have started a relationship with the Lord that way. The second layer is a love of God for the sake of self. And this is when you move from I'm doing this for what I get out of it to I'm doing this because I'm loved. Wow. Right? Like God actually really does love me. And it's about way more than just not going to hell. It's about being in a relationship with the Father who sees me and loves me. And you begin to really start to understand grace, and your imagination, it begins to be captivated with something greater than yourself. This is when you're starting to get free, right? Of the bondage of what do I get out of this? Because it's just no way to live. And then the third layer is a love of God for God's sake. Now we're talking. This is where King David writes, if I could just spend one day in your courts, it would be better than 1,000 elsewhere. That the love of God for the sake of God is he is more beautiful. He is bigger. He is better. He is more present in every moment than any moment I've ever been a part of. There is something far more significant going on here than anything that I could conjure or manufacture on my own. And it's so far beyond me. And yet I have been called and saved and purposed to be lost in this thing that's so beautiful. And the love of God for God's sake, like I think we can live there for much of our life. I do. I think it's the combination of discipline and desperation and desire all coming together. And discipline and desperation are two things that we can choose. Desire is something that grows out of that, right? And the fourth level is a love of self for the sake of God. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that I completely and wholly accept all the parts of me, all of them, past, present, and future, and I surrender them wholly. The fake me, the real me, I surrender them wholly unto the glory of God as an empty vessel. And the only way I can empty the vessel is to do the work of realizing what's in there first to get it out. And I think that's what Bernard of Clairvaux is talking about is how do I... a lot of times we spend time trying to grow fruit in the midst of growing while weeds are growing. But it's really hard for anything healthy to grow when unhealthy things are growing. And so until we get in there and do the work to get out the stuff and to at least give it a name so that it loses its power and we identify the seed of it and let the Holy Spirit do his thing, we can truly, when you get to the place of loving yourself for the sake of God, you get to the place of true humility where there's no part of you rising up that would make you the center of the narrative because you know yourself so well. That's what Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. He doesn't say don't love yourself. He says that you have the ability to love something else and someone else as much or more than you love yourself. But it's a process to get there. So long answer, that's a hard question to answer. But
yeah, I'm pretty sure that was probably a whole hour-long teaching that you just did in like 3 minutes. Yeah. But how is that different from self-care?
Well, at self-care, the narrative of self-care is that I'm the center of I'm at the point. I'm the point. The point is for me to be the healthiest version of me, for the sake of me, or even for the sake of the people that I'm around. But that's just not the invitation of true self in regards to the New Testament. And so the more time I spend thinking about me, the less joy I will experience in this life. But there's only one way to get to the place to where you can not think of yourself first or most often. There's only one way. And it is not by not thinking of yourself. It's by doing the hard work of understanding what's actually going on inside and why it's going on inside, where it comes from, how the enemy's coming against you, how you're coming against yourself, where you're selfish, doing that hard work. You're not strong enough just to like, I got this and I'm going to ignore myself. It just won't work. Yeah. Eventually you are going to catch up to you and you're a problem you have to deal with. And you're also an incredibly gifted, an incredibly called person that has great opportunity. You're both of those things. You are your own worst enemy, but you also have great strengths. And navigating you is a tough thing. And you just doing it with the grace of God is the only way forward. So self-care is all about you. We just changed self-help for self-care and stuck Jesus' name on it. Yeah.
That's true.
And
self-care is so finite. And I almost think about it like self-care, if you do something, maybe I don't know. I don't even know. I can't even think of something like you go for a walk because you need a break. But if you're doing it in the spirit of self-care, it's like filling up a Dixie cup with water, where if you're loving self because you know who you are in light of who God is, and you're coming from a really honest place, it's more like you're dipping into the well. So instead of this tiny Dixie cup of water, that's going to drain in 2 seconds. Self-care, it feels good for 1 second, and then you need it again so quickly. But when you're drawing from the deep well, it's just, there's abundance there that's just different than trying to manufacture some sort of care for yourself.
For sure. I mean, I think there's a real truth to self-care can easily become self-exaltation through the form of grumbling and complaining. And it's like, I'm just being authentic. And I say that in quotation marks. I'm just being authentic. And what authentic means is I'm grumbling. And I feel all these negative things and I feel all this bad stuff. And ultimately what I want is to feel better, not to be healthier according to Jesus. You know what I mean? And feeling better and being healthy are not the same thing.
Wow. So. Yeah, that's so good. All right, let's talk about leadership. That's a thing you think a lot about. What would you say are like your 3 to 4 core tenets of leadership that could apply to anyone? This means like leadership in an organization or like stay-at-home moms at home. Like this is just leadership in general. What would you say are 3 to 4 core tenets?
Yeah, there's a lot of different definitions of leadership. There's an all staff coming to you on what leadership actually is, but
great.
There's a definition. I want to say John Maxwell coined it years ago. Leadership is influence, and so therefore everybody has leadership. And if you define leadership that way, then I agree. And so, how do you steward your influence in a way that's effective in whatever areas that God's given you influence? That's one way I understand your question.
Okay.
The other way is that the Bible actually talks about leadership as a gift, and not everybody has it.
Okay.
And if you see leadership as a gift that not everybody has it, the only way to know if you're effectively stewarding that gift is to look over your shoulder and see, is there anybody following? Because a lot of people think leadership is opinions. Leadership is ideas. Leadership is, position that they think, because I have opinions and I have ideas and I'm a leader because I have convictions. I'm a leader. And it's like,
or a strong personality.
Yeah. None of those things equal leadership in regards to stewarding the biblical gift of leadership. But leadership is influence. How do you steward your influence well in whatever area that God has you? Well, I think that one is...
Wait, sorry. So do you believe both are true? That leadership is influence and leadership is a gift?
No, I only think leadership is a gift, but I also think everyone has influence. I just wouldn't call it leadership.
Got it. Okay, so we're talking now influence.
Influence.
Okay, great.
And so I think that influence, the way you steward your influence in your family, in your workplace, is one, God's more interested in who you're becoming than he is in what you're doing. And so be very focused on being holy, being humble. Sometimes you're going to have to get your heart and your mind to catch up with your mouth, but choose holy and humble, and God will grow your influence. You know, he says, I will resist the proud, but I will exalt the humble. I'll give grace to the humble. And so that's one, stewarding influence as well. Two, don't focus on the destination as much as you just keep your eyes on the direction, right? And we're all trying to get there, wherever there is. But every time we get there, we only find ourselves disappointed because here we are with us. Everywhere I go, I take me with me. And just doing the next thing faithfully. What's the next opportunity to love well? What's the next opportunity to die to myself? What's the next opportunity to laugh, to, just so being focused on the destination, on the direction, not the destination. And then, the others, it's Philippians 2 is some of the best leadership or influence advice that you could ever get in any realm, is to treat others as more significant than yourself, because that's what Jesus did for you. And so I think that those three things are real practices in regards to, like, my children are not a means to my end. They're more significant than me. And that doesn't mean that I self-abuse myself in the name of my kids or that they get whatever they want. But I believe, we talk about this in regards to the folks that attend our church and that we get to serve week in and week out. When I'm sitting across the table with someone that's wrestling through whatever God's doing in their life, the question I have to always ask myself is, do I believe that this person has as much or more kingdom potential than me? Because the Bible would say they do. Most of the time, we look at other people and say, how can they help me do the thing I'm trying to do? How can my kids help me feel the way that I want to feel as a parent? How can my wife make me feel this way about myself? Not, how can I be a partner with what God's doing in their life for them and treat them as more significant than myself? So that's how you steward influence, is you treat others as more significant than you. Leadership is it's a gift and it's a whole other thing. So I can talk about that too if you want. But
yeah, let's talk about it for a little bit. What would you say? You already defined leadership, as a gift. So what would you say? Maybe someone's thinking, do I have the gift of leadership? Like, how would they know?
You won't until you look over your shoulder and see, is there anybody following? And I think that that's the only way, is to look back and go.
So it's not positional.
No. There's a lot of diagnostics in this world that would say there's layers of leadership, and I know what they mean, and I'm not saying they're wrong. I just think truly in regards to the New Testament prescription, leadership is a gift. And the only way to know so I think in my context, when I think about it in the circles that I spend most of my time in, I look at guys that would say, I'm a leader. And I'm like, well, if you went and did something different, would anyone go with you? And that's a pretty good answer to, do I actually carry the gift of leadership? And so I think that the gift begins to show itself through things like desired outcomes. You have a gift of leadership that if your desired outcomes are for the collective good of many, and you're able to hold things in tension, like in church world, you're able to hold things in tension like flock and sheep, that it is about each individual taking next steps, but it's also about the collective whole being obedient and heading in a direction that God would lead. So, but at the end of the day, leadership is not measured in any individual reaching or realizing their potential. It's only measured in faithfulness over time.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right. So why is balance a myth? And then what is the importance of rhythms?
Balance is a myth because none of us can do it. and it's a false narrative to think that you can carve out each day or each week and you live a balanced diet of habits and practices. You can't do it. Rhythm, though, is way more rooted in kind of the Old Testament prescription of Sabbath, that we rest and we work. We rest and we work. And so another way to look at it is that you plant, it grows, and you harvest. And so we're always in a season of planting, growing, and harvesting. That's rhythms. The way that the earth works is a rhythm. And so balance is a myth because nobody's balanced. Nobody's equally gifted at the same things. Nobody is wired to give this amount of hours to this or that amount of hours to this. We're unique people. And so for me to look at you and go, what you need to do is wake up at 5 a.m. and read your Bible for an hour and then check your emails and then get your kids ready and then da-da-da. And this is the prescription for a healthy life for you. I don't know, because I don't know how God's wired you, and I can tell you what it looks like for me. But the rhythm thing is like, so much of that is about being intentional with the season that you're in, and it changes based on your season. So here's what I want. I want my wife and I to have a healthy marriage. In order for that to happen, there's some rhythms that have to be in place. There has to be some time set aside for us to look each other in the eyeballs and talk. Now, sometimes that's 2 hours on a Sunday night. Sometimes it's more of a rhythm of date nights. Sometimes it's more and so every 3 to 6 months, we have to sit down and evaluate that rhythm in our life. Based on the season we're in, based on the season that's coming, how do we best practice this rhythm? And it changes. There's no one way. We have to have a trip or two a year where we just get away together if we want to have a healthy marriage. Okay, so we have to look at that season by season and go, how are we going to do this? So I think that's the short answer to what could be a very long question is the prescription of balance is completely overrated. But most people, life is happening to them instead of them happening to their lives.
That's right.
And the only way to happen to your life is to look down the scope of the season that you're in. Be honest about the season of you're in. I'm in a season right now where we're at the swimming pool. My daughter swims all the time, and my youngest plays softball. We're at the softball fields all the time, and they're in a very extracurricular season of life, and those things are not in my way. But the only reason that's true is because we saw it coming. And we were able to plan for it and build rhythm through the season that we're in.
Yeah, that's so good. I feel like there are a lot of people, and me included at times, who you're striving so hard for balance. And it's like it's like a fluffy cloud you can't actually hold on to. Like it's actually a vapor because it's actually not possible. And so you could be feeling constantly overwhelmed. I will feel overwhelmed when I'm trying to just white knuckle balance because it's just impossible. You can never get the scales to weigh the same on either side. So you will always then feel imbalanced instead of embracing the season that you're in of these are just some of the realities of our life right now and where the things on our plate are falling, and let's embrace the season. And it's not forever. And so recognizing what seasons are forever and what are not forever. Like, I hope to be married to Wes forever. So what am I doing rhythmically to support that? We're not always going to have a 3 and a 1-year-old. So rhythmically, let's be way more intentional about the time we get to spend with them while they want to spend time with us, or they have to. And let's be really intentional about that because this is a fleeting season.
For sure. Yeah, balance is often the prescription for failure. And it's just live a balance. And it's a prescription for bifurcation, meaning like compartmentalization of you've got your hobby, do enough of that. You've got your friends, do enough of that. You got your work, do enough of that. You got your kids, do enough of that. And you try to put them in different drawers.
For sure.
And there's just, you will be losing on some front if you live your life that way. But if you pursue rhythm, it's a different thing altogether. It's like a really good song.
For sure.
You know, it rises and it falls, and but the tempo's the same.
Yeah, that's so good. All right, this is one of my favorite quotes that you've said. And this was talking about authenticity being a vital component of the Christian and where we place authenticity. And this is the quote: when someone asks how I'm doing, I want to answer, I feel complicated. My brain is full, my body hurts somewhere, my heart is ready, my purpose is clear right until it isn't. My relationships are rich, but at times I feel totally alone with my own thoughts. I'm excited about where we're going, grateful for where we've been, and feel bad about the opportunities I've missed along the way. Layered is how I'm doing. Complicated is how I'm doing. So good. Truly one of the most relatable quotes I've ever heard. Why is authenticity such a vital component of the Christian walk?
Because if you're not willing to be honest, then you can never be free. And that's Pastor Joby's line, but it's so true. And truly being honest is about way more than how I feel. It's about what's actually going on inside of me. Feelings come from thoughts, and thoughts come from experiences. Thoughts come from all different kinds of places, the enemy, our family history, and so you can't really be authentic if you live trapped in your feelings. But you can never truly be free if you live trapped in your feelings. But your feelings are also real. They're just leading to something else. And so I think authenticity at the end of the day, John Calvin says, know thyself and know God. Know yourself to know that you're not him. And the more aware I am of all of the intricacies of me, the more ability I have to confess those things and to not just not be sucked into the trap of me, so that I can truly be free. And so I think true authenticity, most of the time, especially in Christian circles, and honestly, mostly in like Christian vocational minister circles, what we mean is I'm just trying to, when they say I want to be authentic, what they mean is I want you to value what I feel in my opinion. But that's not real authenticity. You're just saying words. You're just saying words, and you're looking for validation in somebody else's response. And true authenticity is giving language to the thoughts and to the patterns that are deep inside of me that manifest themselves in feelings, and really getting down on the level of self. So anyway, it's a thing. It's just really hard work. True authenticity is a very, very hard work, because it is simultaneously true that I am a sinner and I am a son.
That's right.
And those things are both authentically true all the time.
Yeah. And we're complicated beings. We have layers.
Totally.
And when someone asks you how you are, I mean, obviously you want to use discernment on who you're sharing all your stuff with, but it is important to recognize that you can simultaneously feel grateful for where you are and be struggling with where you're going or something else that's going on.
You almost always will be.
Right. Yeah.
And the call of the Christian life is certainly not to not struggle. Does that make sense? It isn't to have a struggle-free life. The gift of grace is that we can struggle well through life unto glory.
Yeah.
That's a different thing altogether.
For sure.
And so,
For sure.
yeah.
All right. Last question. I want to talk about our prayer lives. You said this quote: "There's nothing more important to your life than hearing the voice of God." What does a healthy prayer life look like?
Yeah, it's John 10. What we've worked through as a church, it's listening to the voice of the Good Shepherd and doing what he says. In order to hear the Good Shepherd's voice, it requires as much turning down the knobs and the noise of this world as much as it turning up the noise of the kingdom. You know, it's a lot of turning down the noise of this world. And that's only done by choice. And most of us we don't know what to do with ourselves. The one of the best quotes I've ever heard is that the trouble the trouble we have in the American church is not that we don't have anything to do. It's that we don't know what to do with ourselves. And most of us have an unhealthy prayer life, and me too. I've struggled with this. If I really got honest about prayer, the reason I've struggled with a potent prayer life over many years is because when I was a teenager, I prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed that God would heal my mom, and he didn't in the way that I thought he should. Now she's totally healed now, and I can theologically articulate all those things. But when I went, the scar on my soul was kind of, what's the point? Because of pain that I endured and disappointment and disillusionment. And so over the years, I've found prayer to be a real point of discipline. But maybe in my first couple of years on staff at 1122, I was 33 when Pastor Joby put me in the seat that I'm in now. Wow. And more or less said, we're going to do this thing together. But as far as your part's concerned, have at it, Scooter, and I kind of I quickly realized that I was at the well beyond my own personal giftings or talents. And I was way in over my head. And that my prayer life certainly didn't match the amount of responsibilities that I was being trusted with. And I had to ask why and what was that all about. And so I think the simple childlike faith of prescription of prayer from Jesus is clearing out the noise, willfully choosing silence and solitude, putting yourself in a position to hear from the Good Shepherd. And that position is primarily because you can be in silence and solitude and only think about you. Mm-hmm. That's the hard work of prayer, is to get into silence and solitude and not make prayer all about you, but to be able to quiet the mind, quiet the soul, quiet the noise. And that is found in repetition of doing it over and over and over again. The amount of time the shepherd spends out in the middle of the field doing nothing but watching the sheep. That's what a great shepherd does, is a whole lot of nothing while watching the sheep. And so I think that's a lot of prayer from the outside looks like nothing. But on the inside, it's dealing with all the wolves. It's planning the next steps. So anyway, you get the analogy. That said, John 2:5, Joby says it all the time. The best advice in the scripture is to do whatever he tells you to do. The imperative there is you actually have to know what he's telling you to do. And prayer is a great opportunity to question the assumptions that just because I'm the one doing it, then God must be in it. It's like, hold on, just because I want to do it, that doesn't mean that it's the Lord. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, I could go on, but.
It's great. Well, Pastor Britt, thank you so much for coming and sharing on the Neighbors podcast. I said at the beginning, but you have been such a wealth of knowledge and wisdom in my life. You've played a significant impact in my journey in ministry and leadership. And I'm really grateful for you. And I'm just so excited that we got to share just little tidbits of all of that wisdom here today. So thanks.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. And hopefully people are blessed through our conversation. And thanks for doing it.
Yeah.
It's cool, man. I hope God grows your influence through it. And I hope God grows the footprint of this part of your ministry in significant ways. And so good for you for being courageous and stepping into it. And it's hard, man. It's hard to get people think you want a microphone and lights, but it's hard to put yourself out there, in an authentic way that matters. So good for you. Sure. Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks for listening. We'd love for you to join us in The Neighborhood, our Patreon community. It's a space for the good, the hard, and the hilarious. A place where real life happens. It's $5 a month or any additional amount you choose. You'll get a podcast episode once a week from Caitlin and I, plus additional videos, early access to events and merch, and more fun things we'll do along the way. So come join us by going to patreon.com/neighborspodcast and sign up. We'll see you in the neighborhood. And if you enjoy Neighbors, we'd love for you to leave us a 5-star review anywhere you listen to the podcast, or subscribe and give this video a thumbs up on YouTube. Sharing is the best way to help our conversations make it into more corners of life. To grab your favorite Neighbors merch or resources, you can head to our website, theneighborspodcast.com. Neighbors is produced by Logger Creative, audio by Taylor Minning, and music by Austin and Lindsay Adamak. See you next time.
Brighter days, new mercies every morning. You never shy away to tell me that you're for me. How could I repay this? Whatever can I do but offer up this life?